So our job is to continue providing world-class tools that help to streamline the transition for developers, farmers, help them enhance operational efficiency, help them maximize and cut costs, and also obviously get better and better around AI and machine learning, using all of these inputs to help folks make better decisions.
Welcome to Carbon Conversations, a podcast by Biochar Life, where we explore the cutting edge of environmental solutions, from biochar to smart agriculture to the climate tech revolution. We sit down with experts and business leaders at the forefront of change. This is your host, Matt Rickard. Hey, Jason, how you doing? Good evening.
It's great to see you. Thanks so much for having me on here.
Yeah, my pleasure. The city's looking good behind you. That is what, Manhattan behind you?
It is, Matt. It is the city, as you can see, just like us, that never sleeps.
Indeed, I know.
It looked like this when I woke up too today.
Well, I know it's a late one for you, so I appreciate you staying on. Before we even jump into it, I just saw a post online. So congratulations, Boston Community Awards, a finalist for the most likely to be next unicorn, right? And we'll talk about grain ecosystem in a minute. But yeah, congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. It was hard earned by the team, and we're excited for the next steps in the journey.
Awesome. Well, look, as introduction, I won't do it a disservice. I'll let you jump in and talk us a little bit about grain ecosystem, what inspired you to create the organization, what you guys are doing, and then we can get into all the other stuff.
Happy to do that, Matt. And I think it's a very pertinent discussion, because we see with the transition more big corporates like Schneider Electric getting more and more involved. And obviously later in the program, we're going to talk more about Scope 3 and the role of these companies in regenerative ag. But really, grain came to be for a multitude of reasons. But one of them is you have a pioneering global dominant company like Schneider Electric in the energy space. And this is a business that was one of the first to embrace the SDGs, and they had an access to energy program, which I worked on when I lived in Middle East and Africa. They were one of the first to do the Planet Society Barometer. And you have a leader in Jean-Pascal Tricoire, who was the CEO for many years, who was part of the UN Global Compact. So I think first and foremost, when you think about how grain came to be, it's very important that you realize that there's a story behind it, a dynamic story with a company that's been clearly a leader in sustainability, and Schneider Electric. And basically, Matt, what happened was a number of years ago, they put out this call, this Dare to Disrupt challenge. It was really one of the first of its kind, building on some earlier Go Green in the City initiatives, where employees could form teams and really pitch groundbreaking business ideas, with the mantra essentially being to find the next billion-dollar business. So myself and my two co-founders, Ryan and Matt, we had a lot of exposure ourselves in the industry. So for me personally, I had touched on different elements around circular economy, sequestration, even biochar during my time living in the Middle East and traveling around Africa and India. And ultimately, what the program allowed us to do was think about something that we really wanted to challenge, something around digitization, business vision, and the program allowed us to nurture this talent and optimize the energy. And they brought in a lot of different stakeholders within the business to really help us to nurture the idea. And it was really interesting, because there was no guarantee of anything, regardless of winning the challenge. There was 250 teams, Matt. We were very fortunate to be one of 3 that got chosen to be incubated at Greentown Labs, which is a very reputable and well-known incubation hub here in the United States, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we were ultimately the only one that was selected and funded initially by Schneider Electric Ventures. So that's their corporate venture arm, managing assets. I think they're now over $2 billion in assets. But the vision around grain really was, we've seen how great Schneider is in Scope 1 and Scope 2, and we've been part of that transition and transformation around all the capital going into the transition to renewables. But there was just this huge gap on sequestration, waste to value, and ultimately thinking about scope 3. And we made a very compelling thesis and statement, and ultimately the team drove it home with a lot of help from our friends at Mach 49 and the broader Schneider Electric community. And happy to answer deeper questions or talk more in detail about the dynamic and inclusive workplace and experience going through the program.
Cool. Well, let's talk about the digital elements that you've touched on there. So I know Grain emphasizes, sustainable practices, digital transformation in agriculture. How do you see these types of initiatives impacting the future of farming, the agricultural and food security sector, I suppose, more broadly?
Sure. Well, I'm going to make a couple of really important points. Without nature, global GDP is zero. So when we looked at our business in the early days, and we looked at a lot of the research that was out there, and I think it's a state of finance report on nature revealed there was some kind of the annual investment of nearly 7 trillion in activities detrimental to nature, which have overshadowed money that is going into nature-based solutions. So we've seen flows go into industries like construction and oil, and that has driven some of these things for sure. And the goal is, as you know, Matt, we need to fund nature-based solutions. There's a big gap. We've got to triple these investments. So how is Grain approaching it? And I'll go a little bit to the digitization story. Part of it is we're working very closely with Schneider Electric and our colleagues there and colleagues in the ecosystem to optimize visibility into opportunities for insetting and offsetting across supply chains. And what does that mean? It means enhancing regenerative agriculture practices through solutions like biochar, looking more closely at waste to value, at soil amendments, at things that are eligible under different grants and under different solution sets that are there in the space today. But a bigger piece of it is, how do we offer educational support, standardized terminology? We're going to talk a little bit about a lot of the terminologies that are out there. And then how do we ultimately assist farmers and large corporations? If you think about what Grain does today, we've got a knowledge hub. We make it really easy to think through and look at eligibility for a biochar project, so you can rapidly understand what is the value proposition of this waste byproduct that I have today. We've done that through developing dynamic questionnaires and ultimately ingesting the different carbon calculations. Because in the early innings, Matt, we talked to hundreds of developers. This was even before we picked biochar. We looked at blue economy, certainly afforestation, reforestation, but the same trends continue to emerge. Quality validation, fault detection, and MRV. And when you think about these elements, part of the Schneider process that I alluded to at the beginning, one of our co-founders led the AI Hub. He's got many decades working in digitization and machine learning. It's all about facilitating risk prediction, project data quality assessments, and then doing the right stakeholder matching. So the last thing I'll say, Matt, in terms of regenerative ag and how we help farmers and other stakeholders like sugar mills, lumber mills, etc., is helping them think about, based on the feedstock byproduct and the location and other vital factors and the economics, what is the best technology ultimately to drive forward the right type of services and solutions to then position your project for access to capital. So we are very adamant on being digital first and getting better and better at leveraging the data from our hundreds of developers that rely on the tool all over the world.
You just touched on, just picking up on something you said there, you touched on insetting. And it's been interesting, I think, for us looking at the market, and it is different depending on what parts of the world you're in. But I thought I would see a lot more insetting, and maybe it's just that we're not speaking to the right people. How do you see that area? Because for me, it's an obvious way for, big food production companies to balance out their supply chain against the impact. And are you seeing insetting projects, starting to kind of finance and come alive? Or what are you seeing in that space out of interest?
Sure. And the beauty of, and one of the reasons I love your podcast is listening into the variety of different speakers. You get such unique thoughts and insights and perspectives that you don't typically get just by reading the plethora of things that are available today. So just to shape your audience a little bit from what we're seeing, and we have a very unique vantage point, particularly through a lot of the early innings work we've done. And I've spent a lot of my career working with big corporates to help them solve the decarbonization problems. But first of all, Europe on scope 3, moving very quickly on the food companies. And we're seeing, particularly out of Switzerland, companies like Nestle, Lindt, Fifes, and others, Louis Dreyfus even making very, very bold bets and looking to accelerate forward, obviously on the heels of a lot of the EU work and regulation. And we're going to give some live examples a little bit later in the discussion. The US has been more of a consumer story. So you see this push getting farmers to produce better products that align with what consumers demand. I mean, Matt, I lived in Europe for a long time. Even the basics, you go to a McDonald's in Europe, you get a hamburger versus here, or going to the farmer's market, it is a noticeable difference. And there's a huge push from consumers to maximize, not just improve crop resilience, but reduce fertilizers, synthetics, etc. And then, in Australia, we've seen this burgeoning carbon and biodiversity market that is pushing Scope 3 forward. And then obviously the big one here, and this was a lot of talk at the US Biochar Conference in California, SB 253 in California. It's the Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act. I think I got that right. And basically it's requiring organizations that are operating in California, I think they've got to have, doesn't matter what their footprint looks like. If they're in California and they've got in excess of $1 billion, they've got to have a Scope 3 emissions disclosure plan in place by 2027.
Yeah, okay.
So what is that doing? It's accelerating a lot of the things. I'm going to talk a lot more about some of the issues we're seeing momentarily, but I'll give you one last use case. What's driving this as well is finally you have a lot of tests and a lot more end use applications that are also making it a lot easier for the economics of the story. I'll give you an example. Every year the world produces a staggering 10 billion kilograms, and for my friends here in the US, that's roughly 21, 22 billion pounds of coffee waste globally. Most of that's going to landfills. But, we've seen in Australia, and I think some of the places in Europe are starting to pyrolyze the coffee grounds and using the resulting biochar as a cement additive. So the point being, and companies like Wholesome and others with their Scope 3 initiatives can solve major problems. And when you add this stuff directly to the concrete mat, they remove the leakage of chemicals, improve the strength of the building material. And so using low energy levels, you can heat that coffee waste in excess of 350 degrees Celsius and in an absence of oxygen. So the point being, we're seeing more regulation, but also a lot more really rewarding and economically viable use cases. And again, that's what grain is here to do. It's art of the possible around the economics to align with what's happening in the field that just makes it really good business practice for these companies.
Yeah, that's a great use case. I mean, there's a lot happening in the coffee sector, but that particularly around concrete, and we're working on some use cases here in Thailand now with Siam Cement Group, and it's super interesting just learning, these new ways that concrete can be made, using biochar, replacing cement, making it more neutralized in its impact. So, talking about some of the challenges you guys have faced yourself, Grain, in promoting sustainable agriculture, how have you addressed them? And actually, how do you see those challenges different on a global scale? Because I assume the challenges you face in the US are probably different when you're looking at solutions in sub-Saharan Africa or other areas. So what are the biggest challenges? How have you tackled them, and how do they differ globally? A few things in there, but
I feel at times, Matt, like it's Groundhog Day, because I was very fortunate to play a key role in a lot of the elements around the energy transition, particularly with microgrids. So I helped to work closely to do some really, really exciting pioneering work in the US and overseas on distributed energy, and even small grids, or even things where you're just having basic avoidance. And what we're seeing, I mean, the trends and the parallels to where we were 15, 20 years ago on the renewable side is really intriguing. So we're trying to look at those different trends and patterns in the data. And obviously we bring entrepreneurship and innovation and speed and scale. But the big challenges that we see today outside of the capital, we're going to talk a lot more about the capital and what we're doing to drive capital and help get fund structures looking at this space. First of all, sustainable agriculture, as an example, this requires substantial resources. So water, land, labor, and it may not always be readily available. I know in the pre-call, we talked a little bit, and I'm fascinated by some of the work that you and your team are doing with smallholder farmers. But it's about aligning the right resources and capabilities together to be able to transition to sustainable practices. And that's the goal, is if we can step in up front with our ecosystem of partners to provide the right information and disseminate the right knowledge points. Because I'll give you an example, a cautionary tale, one that I think a lot of us were very optimistic, is what happened in Sri Lanka. They had a national experiment around organic agriculture that I was personally following very, very closely. I have a lot of great friends there. We've worked with a lot of organizations over the years in Sri Lanka, and certainly in Southeast Asia, and in the Pacific parts of the world, etc. And if you think about what went wrong there, so they transitioned to a fully organic model, and it was unsustainable and exacerbated economic and humanitarian woes. And part of that is the inadequate policy frameworks and regulations. When you just go cold turkey, so to speak, and try to drive sustainable products, and it highlights the importance of increasing consumer demands for different foods and hindering adoption and having the right pieces. So you've got to have the right frameworks, methodologies, and teams and structures in place to be successful. And you've got to also consider, Matt, incorporating the true cost of nature into a P&L analysis. That's also part of it. Whether it's a big company or a small company, once these costs are accurately reflected, you can then drive more action, more investment in nature, and then address biodiversity and climate. And the last thing I'll say really quick on this topic, because it is one that really lose a lot of sleep on, and you think about tragedy of the commons, but you do see voluntary disclosure standards. I think CDP, and hold me accountable because I may not get them all right because there's so many of them, but TCFD and TNFD. So these are the CDP was formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project, and then TCFD was the task force on climate related financial disclosures. These frameworks for organizations to disclose information for their environmental impacts is really, really critical. So my belief system is that widespread disclosures will generate more demand for high quality carbon and nature offset projects. And they're going to be essential to enhancing the quality of existing programs while ultimately avoiding perfection becoming the enemy of progress.
Cool. You're good with your acronyms. I think you got. I mean, I came from that. I came from that world. It's been a while. In the work we do, we don't have to kind of worry so much on the corporate side in terms of. But yeah, CDP. I came from the software world and carbon energy management some time ago. But maybe a good segue. You mentioned Scope 3 a couple of times, and maybe let's get into that a bit more in terms of from your point of view. What can corporations do better in terms of engaging farmers and addressing their kind of broader Scope 3 initiatives?
So one of the things that I've learned, and I was fortunate a little over a month ago now, again, the time just evaporates, to go to the Reuters event here in New York City. And it was very focused on supply chain, Scope 3, waste to value. And you had the CSOs of many of the major companies that we all recognize there. And one of the things that stood out to me is that farmers have immense choice. So these companies are desperately looking to build transformative partnerships with their farmers and their supply chain stakeholders, because farmers can switch. They can go from an AB InBev to a Pepsi to a Coca-Cola, etc. So the key to the strategy, if I'm a large corporate, is to work as hard as I possibly can to put in place collaborative partnerships, prioritize innovation at all costs to understand the farmers' challenges, and ensure that these are enduring and not transactional. Because if you give farmers access to the right tools, these are incredibly resourceful, resilient, sharp individuals, and it enables the next generation. A lot of the stuff we do when we go visit farmers and have discussions is talking to the next generation. They get excited about these projects, not just the digital element or the capacity to work with some of these big companies that have large supply chains, but also because of the offsetting strategies. If you can get to work with companies that are part of the Frontier Fund or the Google, Schneider Electrics, UBSs of the world, it's really exciting. That's the first thing. The second thing, Matt, that I think about a lot, and again, what we're trying to address on a day-to-day basis, is enhancing transparency and traceability. So helping with robust monitoring, reporting, because at the end of the day, you need to be able to track emissions and water usage and land use changes. You have to make sure companies and their CSOs that are driving these changes and putting their money behind these solutions are proud, and they don't have to backpedal related to certain elements. I mean, you have to take risks. We need catalytic capital. You need the big players to come into the space like Nestle, Pepsi, and lit, and they've already started to demonstrate that they understand, the fundamental truth of ecology. Everything's interconnected. But through partnerships like Schneider Electric, Grain, JECA Environment, who you've had on the show in the past, and other OEMs and key stakeholders, these companies can quickly take pioneering steps to spearhead and execute frameworks, and they can drive biodiversity reporting and do more on recognition of the intricate links between climate change and nature. And that's what it's all about. And I'll just close by saying one of the things I admire about what Nestle is doing, I mean, they're advocating for integrated disclosures that reveal the interdependence of business and ecosystems. So a forward-thinking approach like that is going to bring together the realms of business and science, and then it's going to shape optimal strategies for financial disclosures related to nature. Again, you're seeing and hearing a lot more, but we're in this stage, Matt, of execution, and companies have to place bets and engage on innovative technologies if they want to move fast. 100%.
And I think it leads on nicely to the conversation around capital. I think right at the beginning you mentioned, I mean, this is a key area. Obviously, it's, a big part of what you're doing is really trying to approach how can you capitalize projects. The cost of capital is high. I mean, we know better than anyone. We're in the production side. We're fundraising at the moment. It's not easy. More capital is needed. It's crucial in terms of growing projects like our own, like biochar projects. How does Grain approach this? What strategies are you implementing? How do you see the capitalization of this market in general and how we scale?
So first, taking a step back from the work we're doing at Grain, again, just to share with the audience some of the trends that we've observed, particularly from talking to a lot of folks in the space and surveying and attending events. On the natural capital side, we're seeing more investors emerge. These are folks that are very interested in carbon, biodiversity, water, timber, and figuring out how to get them all working together. There's a growth in non-institutional demand, particularly retail investors. And ultimately, Matt, farmland in general, on average, has returned roughly 5%. It's yielded about 5% annually over the last 50 years. So as you know better than anybody, and your work is a testament to this, with regenerative ag practices, just the basics, you can add 2 to 4% in yield by incorporating these solutions. So certain flavors of regenerative ag are more competitive than ever. And that's very important. But it's also important to understand economically where we are as a society. I mean, we still got the war in Ukraine, which is a major issue. It's choking out resources around the world. Certainly it's impacted supply chains. And in my past life, doing electrical distribution and doing microgrid systems, you need to get those critical resources. And think about it. To do biochar, you need pyrolyzers and gasifiers and modular units. So supply chain is still an issue. And then a lot of people don't realize, Matt, you also have a major swine flu in China. And what is that doing? There's a hoarding of inputs tied to rice production. So why I'm very interested in that, and this is how we think at Grain, cost structures are going to be significantly higher. So this is really important when you think about valuation and geographies and the types of investors that we try to sync up with the right types of projects. Now, in addition, when you think about what we're doing at Grain, the issues of localization do remain a challenge in understanding ultimately nature-related dependencies, risks, opportunities, and really figuring out what is the right two-pronged approach to assessing investment. Because you've got top-down and bottoms-up. And again, that's the beauty of what we do in our tool. Once we get through the carbon elements and we have them double-checked and certainly maintain integrity from our carbon experts that are on the team, we go through a very lengthy process of really economic analysis, knowing and keeping at the forefront, Matt, where in the world these projects are going to be. Because you also want to avoid overcomplication of the process, but it's imperative. We're locking the financial models, we're simplifying the models because we want to make sure that the investors are seeing the right things. And at the end of the day, as I said at the beginning, carbon removal projects, Matt, are going to play a pivotal role. I think you want to lean in for a second. Let's talk about some questions that you've gotten, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about the capital stack and how we're approaching that.
Well, actually, something I wanted to ask, which is interesting, which is completely linked, is what are you seeing in terms of that balance of, what pivots an investment of price versus confidence, security, these types of things. I mean, and I'm asking this question very much from our perspective as someone out there talking to the market, trying to close both capital and credit sales, which ultimately finances our business model. There's this balance between the market wants a lower price, but also wants the delivery of a better service consistently and better technology, better DMRV. Where do you see that in terms of that balance within the market and what buyers are seeking now and I suppose over the next 5-10 years in terms of what's needed?
So first of all, lots of education still needs to happen. And I've been surprised, Matt, at how having, again, as I told you when we first talked, I spent many years living in Dubai and in the UAE. Obviously, COP28, loss and damage fund. There's a lot of commitments. I'm still very surprised. I guess maybe not ultimately that surprised, but we need that catalytic, non-recourse capital flowing faster. We really do, because right now, Matt, the projects that are getting funded in many cases, there's a couple things we see. One, it's a project developer that has collateral. They've got a family business with strong cash flows, and they can put up some collateral of that business, even if they haven't secured an offtake agreement. That's the first, because many projects, they just haven't got those offtake agreements, but they do have the key elements and cornerstones that are very attractive to debt or equity capital. And remember, to close with a bank, there's closing costs. It changes depending on geography and the type of project, but that could be six figures. So this bridge capital, and this is where debt capital and other things really come in. So I've been a little disappointed at the speed with which some of that capital, that catalytic capital, is coming into the place from the development banks. I mean, we've seen some really good use cases that are out there. We've got to go faster. And the point of Grain is to make it happen fast. And a lot of the things I hear from family offices and philanthropic investors, Matt, is they want to know, they want to do it, but they want to know where their capital is going. They want to be able to track the project because they may never have gone to Kenya or Ghana or the Philippines, et cetera, but they want to invest in those markets. So that's a big part of it. Additionally, what I will say, though, is, and this is the beauty of carbon markets and the voluntary carbon market, you de-risk a project substantially when you have a large company that makes a commitment to pre-purchase. So when equity investors, angel investors, and banks see that, we've seen this on a number of our grain projects, that gets them a lot more involved and engaged. And then obviously take out the standard stuff around the tech readiness levels. The team matters. It's just like with Grain Ecosystem. We have a very strong team, and a lot of it was they backed the team. They knew that we would be able to deliver, and we had the connectivity and the experience. Same with you. The reason I'm on the podcast as well. You bring so much to the table, and you're highly reputable, and you ask great questions. And I know we can drive solutions that hopefully more people get involved. So it's some of those elements. And the last thing I'm going to say, Matt, and I can't speak as much to this in other parts of the world, but what is exciting in the U.S. right now, you can finance up to 80% of your project with a USDA-backed loan. You do have reimbursement or incentive criteria under the USDA, and obviously EU is definitely ahead there, but it's reimbursing farmers. The main thing I would just say to the audience is when you're going into programs like that, think about how you maintain integrity of the cash flows. Investors want to know that either you've got a lockbox or a trust or some other structure to ensure those cash flows are flowing where they're supposed to flow and there's integrity there, because that's a huge amount of de-risk if you do have some down years or you do have reversal risk tied to the project. So at a very high level, Matt, that's some of the things, and I can happily provide live use cases, et cetera. But that's some of the stuff. And this is why investors flock to the platform to get educated on how to think about these deals.
Cool. No, good advice, good insights. Appreciate it. And I mean, back to the platform, you guys are at the beginning of a journey, I would say, if I can paraphrase that correctly, but what are your long-term goals, Grain Ecosystem? How do you plan to kind of scale over the coming years? What's your kind of vision for the business moving forward next kind of 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years,
I mean, this is something we're always thinking about. Certainly. I mean, it's critical. I've said this multiple times, but the role of any company, but especially when you have an innovative startup, is you need to find ways to make reversible decisions quick and irreversible decisions deliberate. And I'll never stop doing that. And that's advice I would give to founders anywhere in the world. Where we're going is offering software solutions that are low touch but highly credible is really, and in a democratized way, is hyper critical if we're going to get where we need to go. I mean, it's a moral imperative. You don't do the things that you've done and we've done, leaving your job, and certainly, you get an earful for certain people in your life, but when they see the kind of conviction that you've got, everybody falls in line. So our job is to continue providing world-class tools that help to streamline the transition for developers, farmers, help them enhance operational efficiency, help them maximize and cut costs, and also obviously get better and better around AI and machine learning, using all of these inputs to help folks make better decisions. And ultimately, Matt, global awareness and regulatory pressure is going to continue to mount. Investing in decarbonization software is going to become more and more essential for large corporations. I want to go back to that for a second, because they aren't, this is, I'm calling them out. They're not moving fast enough. I'm eternally grateful, and I've loved what Schneider has done as a large company, and they've gone, I think this is a crazy statistic. When I started at Schneider Electric in 2008 to where they are today, they've gone from like 40th on the CAC Quadrant, which is the top, or 46, ranked in the top by market cap, to I think 4th. And that is a testament to the sustainable element in digitization that they've done, and they've embraced innovation. So we're here, we're waving the flag, and we want to work with these big corporates to help them get where they've got to go faster. So I guess that's some of the stuff that I would say tied to the work we're doing at Grain and where we envision going over the next certainly the next handful of years as we continue to accelerate the work product.
Cool. Well, you're obviously doing something right. Definitely heading in the right direction as it looks today. So, and I couldn't agree more with your thesis on being in that kind of startup phase of just consistently being able to kind of change your mind on strategy and direction, right? As you kind of test and check your product against the market and turn left, turn right as you need to. So, kind of linking into that, bit of a word of advice, and actually let's do this two ways. I mean, what advice would you give first to other founders going into this space, maybe founding kind of technology businesses, but also what advice to project developers on our side of the fence in terms of agricultural projects, securing financing, managing costs? Two different types of businesses, but both linked to what you do. So two pieces of advice. Maybe we can kind of segue towards the end on that.
So a few things there. I've been very, very passionate and engaged at both college campuses at the undergrad level and the master's level. I think it's really important to continue to evolve. I think one of the things that, even when I did my master's, was the outdated business plans around innovation and even building startups within organizations. I think that's something that only a handful of companies have really, really got it right today. So I'm going to give some high level information and guidance. I think first and foremost, though, do the work and show up. The number one thing for me, Matt, and I think this is paid dividends to a lot of the successful startups and founders in my personal network. They just show up. I mean, even now, I'm here. I love talking about it. You've got to make the time, but it also means going and being part of the groups that can help elevate you. Some that come to mind for me, Clean Energy Trust, Rocky Mountain Institute. Obviously, we were part of Greentown Labs and Clean Tech Open, Social Venture Circle. Find those groups. You're going to get mentors, many times at no cost or non-dilutive. So think about those groups and think about, if you've got an idea or a concept, be part of those initiatives, because it's a great way to really refine your business plan, have an incubation network that can support you, and there's no shortage. But networking is really key. Be at the industry events and do the work to make sure that you really have conviction and you can defend yourself. Because at the end of the day, the thing that made us ultimately go all in on this business was the 100th use case. And a lot of people have seen my slide when I presented. It's a slide that shows the process of doing a project. And you see so many red faces, which mean projects and solutions that have died out. or yellows, life support, is because it's a real struggle. You can easily poke holes. So make it almost, even if they can poke a hole, be ready to defend it as to why that, why it is different, what you've learned in your process, and help uncover blind spots even for people that are looking to invest in your company or your co-founders. And obviously it goes without saying, make sure you're picking and being very tactical about your co-founders. At the end of the day, Matt, entrepreneurship is about turning what excites you in life into capital so you can do more of it and ultimately continue to progress and move forward with it. So that's some of the high-level advice that I would give to folks that are seeking, starting a business, or even if they're looking to build an innovation business within a large company. Those things are wildly important and shouldn't be underestimated at any cost.
Cool. Jason, we've touched on a load of different subjects in a very short time. Actually, I realize chatting to you, we could probably do other podcasts where we kind of laser down just on one area. Actually, that's the interesting thing I think about this intro podcast. I didn't have any more questions, but I suppose, is there anything I haven't asked that you feel is important to share? Because I sense there's probably things I haven't even touched on in this short conversation. Anything else you want to kind of share in terms of what you feel is important?
Well, just to go on the second half of that question, because at the end of the day, this is the ethos of what we do and what I spend most of my time personally doing is helping project developers, helping farmers do sustainable ag projects. And this is where grain comes in. So before seeking financing, I can't tell you how many times I've seen project developers that are looking to do biochar agricultural projects coming to the table to want to talk to investors without having done the work and building out the business plan. Mm-hmm. Investors and lenders want to see a well thought out plan that demonstrates the viability and potential for growth. And it's really important you're thinking about scale at all times, because they're going to always ask, what's next? How do I enhance the return structure? How do I de-risk the project? And remember, to entice and engage, you manage risks. You put forth innovative investment models, which is what we do at Grain. And then ensuring you're telling the right SDG and biodiversity stories is hypercritical. Investors and companies, that's at the forefront, because you've got to make sure you not only understand the needs of the farmer, but also offering the solutions that make the whole community benefit and get the next generation involved. So that's what I would close on, Matt, is really when you think about this ecosystem and what it takes, it's back to basics, nuts and bolts, but it's very hard to do. There's a reason I don't want to build financial models anymore. And the last thing I'm going to say, there's a reason there's massive bottlenecks with registries, because if everybody is submitting different economic models, different documentation and form factors, well, we don't move fast. So again, we're trying to bring that level of standardization with elements of customization to the table to get these projects over the finish line. So I would close on that note, hoping that we'll do a multitude of others, as you've stated, where we can laser in on some of these other facets.
Cool. Look, sounds good. It's been great to chat. We had a pre-chat, so we've at least had a couple of conversations now. But it's been great to have you on the podcast. Where can people find out more about yourself, Grain ecosystem? Where can they get in touch, follow you? Do you want to just leave your social links? And for anyone watching or listening, I'll also put these in the speaker notes. So
first and foremost, I would encourage everybody to follow Grain Ecosystem on LinkedIn. We're very active. We've done a couple of webinars lately. I think, Matt, I sent you one of the recordings. Yes, it highlighted what we do as a platform, but it also provided a lot of great insights on financing, on the biochar space, and those elements there. Certainly, I'm extremely active on LinkedIn and providing a lot of detail on LinkedIn. And it's very easy to reach me, jason@grainecosystem.com. And certainly, anybody in the world can go to grainecosystem.com, create an investor account, or create a developer account and get started. And we're at your disposal to help you. Cool.
Look, Jason, it's been great. It's probably nearing 9-10 o'clock there, so I appreciate you staying on late into the evening, and good to see the city behind you. But thanks for joining, and let's do this again sometime.
Appreciate all you do for the community, Matt. Thanks so much.